I run a small sheep farm just outside a town called Millhaven, the kind of place where everybody waves at each other in public and talks trash behind closed curtains, and honestly, I liked it that way. My life was simple, predictable, maybe even boring if you and Oppos reused a city life. But after 15 years working construction and wrecking my knees for people who thought overtime pay was some kind of personal insult, boring felt pretty good. I had 43 sheep, a rusted Ford pickup that only started when it felt emotionally supported, and about 12 acres of rolling pasture that sat beneath a hill lined with newer homes built for people who wanted country living, without any actual country inconvenience. You know the type: spotless boots, designer flannel, chickens they never touched, and giant farmhouse-style kitchens where nobody cooked anything harder than frozen pizza. Then came my new uphill neighbor, Travis Delaney. Guy moved in around late spring, big custom-built house, black windows, stone driveway, one of those outdoor fire pits that looks like it belongs at a luxury ski resort. And from day one, he carried himself like he'd personally invented land ownership. First time we met, he smiled without warmth and said, "Hope your livestock smell doesn't drift uphill too much," which is a pretty wild thing to say to the guy whose farm existed there 40 years before your granite countertops did. Still, I kept things civil because that's what adults do, right? You mind your business, I mind mine. We coexist like semi-functional mammals. For a few months, that's exactly how it went. Until one cold October morning when I stepped outside carrying feed buckets and immediately stopped dead in my tracks. The air smelled wrong. Not manure. Anybody who works around livestock knows manure. Hell, after enough years you stop even noticing it. No, this smell had that sharp chemical rot to it, sour and acidic, like a gas station bathroom mixed with something dead under the floorboards. It hit the back of my throat so hard my eyes watered. I figured maybe a coyote got into something or a septic truck spilled nearby, but then I noticed the sheep clustered way up near the northern fence line, refusing to graze the lower pasture entirely. That scared me more than the smell because animals know when something's off long before people do. I walked downhill and found this dark, wet patch spreading through the grass. Thick, grayish water bubbling up through the soil like the earth itself was sick. The closer I got, the worse it smelled. Flies everywhere. Steam lifting off it in the cold morning air. And right there, cutting through my pasture like a slimy trail, was a stream of runoff coming from uphill. I followed it all the way to the fence line, and that's when I saw the pipe. Bright white PVC sticking just beneath the fence, dripping steadily into my field like somebody had installed the world's nastiest garden fountain. Raw septic discharge. Human waste. Pouring directly onto grazing land where my sheep ate every single day. I remember just standing there for a second staring at it because my brain genuinely refused to process how insanely disrespectful it was. Like, who does that? Who wakes up one morning and decides, yeah, let's dump sewage onto somebody else's property, problem solved. But the second I saw which direction the pipe came from, I already knew. Travis. Of course it was Travis. I marched straight uphill, boots covered in mud and God knows what, and pounded on his front door hard enough to rattle the glass. He opened it wearing one of those expensive quarter-zip sweaters rich guys always wear in commercials about financial security, coffee mug in hand, like we were about to discuss fantasy football instead of biological warfare. I asked him, "You know anything about a pipe draining sewage into my pasture?" And this guy, I swear to God, didn't even look embarrassed. He just shrugged and said, "Yeah. Contractor rerouted the septic overflow last month. Your land slopes downhill anyway. Figured it'd absorb naturally. Absorb naturally. Like my farm was some giant human litter box designed for his convenience." I told him he was contaminating grazing land and potentially poisoning my animals, and he actually laughed, then hit me with, "Relax, it's basically fertilizer." That right there told me everything I needed to know about the man, because there's a certain kind of person who thinks money cancels consequences, and Travis absolutely belonged to that club. The worst part? He genuinely didn't think he'd done anything wrong. In his mind, people like me existed below him, literally downhill and socially too. I called the county health department immediately, and the woman on the phone sounded horrified, but she also said inspections could take several weeks due to backlog. Several weeks. Meanwhile, my lower pasture kept turning into a toxic swamp, and every day that pipe kept flowing. And standing there that evening watching another stream of sewage leak into my field, I realized something ugly about human nature. People like Travis only understand consequences when the consequences crawl directly into their own backyard. Now let me pause the story for a second because this is where a lot of people make the mistake of thinking this was just some dumb neighbor dispute over a fence line or drainage issue. It wasn't. From a legal perspective, dumping septic runoff onto somebody else's property is a massive liability problem. We're talking environmental contamination, groundwater risk, livestock exposure. In some states that can turn into fines, civil lawsuits, even criminal penalties if somebody gets sick. According to standard procedure, any septic modification is supposed to be inspected, permitted, and routed through approved filtration systems, not shoved through a PVC pipe into your neighbor's grass like some kind of hillbilly science experiment. But honestly, the legal side wasn't even the most interesting part to me. The psychology was. Because this is a psychological trap wealthy, entitled people fall into all the time. They convince themselves convenience equals permission. Travis had already mentally downgraded me into the farm guy downhill, which meant my land felt disposable to him. That's why he smirked when he said, "It'll soak in." In his head, he wasn't creating a hazard. He was outsourcing a problem onto somebody he assumed wouldn't fight back. And the lesson here is simple. When somebody treats your boundaries like they're optional, they usually don't stop until the discomfort becomes personal. So after the county told me I'd be waiting weeks for an inspection, I did what most people out in the country do when bureaucracy starts moving slower than cold syrup. I adapted, not recklessly, despite what Travis later screamed at anybody willing to listen, but carefully, methodically, and honestly with way more patience than he deserved. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about living rural. People think farmers are dumb until they watch one solve a problem with $30, old equipment, and pure spite-fueled creativity. Over the next 3 days, that pipe kept running nonstop. Morning, afternoon, middle of the night, didn't matter. Every time I checked, more foul gray water dribbled into my pasture. The lower field became unusable. My sheep avoided it completely, bunching together uphill like they were trying to escape a chemical spill, and the smell? Jesus! You could taste it in the air before you even reached the fence line. Meanwhile, Travis carried on with his little luxury country fantasy like nothing happened. One afternoon, I watched him hosting friends around that expensive fire pit, everybody laughing and drinking wine, while human sewage quietly streamed downhill into my property 50 yards away. That image sat in my brain longer than it should have. Because that's the part that really burned me. Not just the disrespect, but the comfort. He felt comfortable poisoning somebody else's land because he assumed inconvenience was a thing that only happened to poorer people. Then came Thursday evening, and nature handed me an idea. Heavy rain rolled in just before dark, hard enough to rattle the barn roof. I stood on my porch watching water sheet across the pasture when I noticed the runoff pooling near the fence instead of soaking in. That's when the entire plan clicked into place so cleanly, it almost made me laugh. If Travis wanted my field functioning as part of his septic system, fine. I'd simply return the shared property. The next morning, I called my cousin Wade, who owned a skid steer and possessed the moral flexibility required for this kind of operation. I didn't even finish explaining before he started laughing. His exact words were, "Tell me you ain't about to reverse deliver this man's own poop." We spent the entire afternoon digging a shallow containment trench just inside my side of the fence. Nothing crazy, just enough to redirect the runoff into a low basin where the sewage naturally collected instead of spreading through the pasture. Then we packed heavy clay along the edges to hold everything in place. By sunset, we'd accidentally on purpose built the world's nastiest little pond. Every disgusting drop from Travis's illegal pipe drained straight into it. And buddy, it filled fast. Real fast. Within 2 days, the thing looked like a cursed swamp from a low-budget horror movie. Thick brown water, toilet paper fragments floating around, bubbles rising to the surface every few seconds like the earth itself was burping. Even Wade stopped joking after he got a good look at it. "That ain't runoff," he muttered, covering his nose with his sleeve. "That's a lawsuit with smell." But I still hadn't crossed the line yet. That part matters. Legally speaking, I documented everything. Photos every morning. Videos showing the pipe actively draining. Timestamped footage of the contamination spreading through my pasture. According to standard procedure, when you're dealing with property contamination, Documentation is everything because eventually somebody always lies. And Travis? Oh, he was absolutely the kind of guy who'd lie while maintaining direct eye contact. Sure enough, when I confronted him a second time and told him county inspectors were coming, he rolled his eyes and said, "Good luck proving anything." That sentence right there sealed his fate. Because arrogance makes people sloppy, and sloppy people walk straight into consequences they think they're too smart to face. Saturday night, another major storm rolled through. Thunder shook the windows, rain hammered the roof, and by midnight that septic pond was nearly overflowing. I pulled on my rain gear, grabbed the gas-powered trash pump I'd rented earlier that day, and loaded 200 feet of hose into the truck. You ever have one of those moments where you know you probably shouldn't do something, but every cell in your body is already committed? That was me backing the truck toward the fence in the pouring rain, feeling weirdly calm about the deeply questionable choices ahead. I dropped the pump intake into the pond and fired the engine up. The machine coughed twice, then roared to life. Instantly, the hose jerked hard as thick brown sludge surged through it. And let me tell you something. There are few sounds more spiritually satisfying than weaponized karma traveling through industrial tubing at high velocity. I ran the hose uphill through a gap in the fence and aimed it directly toward Travis's backyard drainage slope, right near those pristine landscaping stones his wife posted all over Instagram every other day. Then I opened the valve completely. The hose bucked like a living thing. A massive stream of rancid septic sludge blasted across his lawn, splattering flower beds, patio furniture, and the side of his outdoor kitchen. Rainwater carried it everywhere. Down the stone pathways, into the decorative mulch, across the expensive grass. He paid some landscaping company probably $4,000 a month to manicure. Within minutes, the entire backyard transformed into a foul brown marshland. The smell became unreal. Imagine every truck stop bathroom in America fermenting under a heat lamp. Even standing 50 feet away in the rain, I was gagging. But I kept that pump running until the containment pond was nearly empty, because if Travis taught me anything, it was apparently sharing mattered to him. Around 2 a.m. the backyard flood finally reached his covered patio. That's when the lights inside the house snapped on. A second later, the back door flew open and Travis stepped outside wearing boxers, rain boots, and absolute confusion. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. Then the smell hit him. I have never seen a human face transform so quickly. The man folded in half, gagging before he even spotted me near the fence line. "What the hell is this?" he screamed over the storm. I shut the pump off slowly, calmly, almost respectfully. "Looks like your septic overflow," I yelled back. Figured the ground would absorb it naturally. Even through the rain, I saw the exact moment he recognized his own words being thrown back at him. Rage exploded across his face. He started stomping through the sludge toward the fence, slipping twice in the process, covered nearly knee-deep in the same waste he'd happily dumped into my pasture for weeks. And buddy, I'd love to tell you I acted mature in that moment. But seeing this man covered in his own sewage while screaming about property values nearly sent me into another dimension. Travis kept yelling about vandalism, destruction of property, assault somehow. Rich people love inventing legal terms mid-panic, but I didn't argue, didn't threaten him, didn't even raise my voice. I just held up my phone and showed him the videos. Clip after clip of his pipe draining raw sewage into my field. Date stamps, photos, everything. He went silent instantly. That silence lasted maybe 3 seconds before he muttered, "You recorded me?" Which tells you everything about modern human morality right there. Not, "I contaminated your land." Not, "I endangered your livestock." Nope. His biggest concern was getting caught. By sunrise, the situation looked apocalyptic. The storm had spread sewage across almost his entire backyard. His kid's trampoline leaned sideways in standing brown water. Decorative flower beds floated apart in clumps. One of those expensive patio umbrellas had collapsed face first into the muck like it gave up on life entirely. And the smell, sweet Lord. Cars driving past slowed down because people genuinely thought a sewer line exploded. Around 9 that morning, county inspectors finally arrived after multiple emergency complaints from neighbors uphill. 2 inspectors walked the property wearing protective boots and masks, and the second they traced the contamination back to the illegal pipe, their whole attitude changed. Furious doesn't even cover it. One inspector actually looked at Travis and said, You routed untreated septic discharge onto agricultural land, with the kind of disappointment usually reserved for raccoons trapped inside school cafeterias. From a legal perspective, he was cooked. Completely cooked. They issued immediate violations, emergency containment orders, environmental cleanup requirements, and fines so massive Travis physically sat down on his patio step halfway through the conversation like his knees stopped working. Turns out his contractor never filed permits for the rerouting work either, which opened an entirely different level of trouble. The county forced him to hire a licensed environmental remediation crew, remove contaminated soil, replace sections of drainage line, and professionally restore portions of my pasture at his expense. Insurance refused to cover most of it because the discharge was illegal. Last I heard, the total damage cost him somewhere north of 80 grand. 80 grand. All because he couldn't be bothered to treat the farmer downhill like an actual human being. And the craziest part? If he'd just apologized the first day, maybe offered to fix it immediately, none of this would have happened. But entitlement has a weird effect on people. This is a psychological trap powerful personalities fall into constantly. They mistake tolerance for weakness. Travis thought my patience meant submission. He thought because I spoke calmly, lived simply, and worked with animals instead of stock portfolios, I'd quietly absorb whatever garbage rolled downhill into my life. Literally. These days my pasture's healthy again. The sheep graze there every morning like nothing ever happened. Travis still lives uphill, though now the giant privacy trees along our fence line mysteriously appeared right after the incident. Funny how badly people want separation after consequences start flowing both directions. And every once in a while, usually after heavy rain, I'll catch the faint smell of damp earth drifting across the property line and think to myself, some lessons cost more than others. You know, the older I get, the more I realize neighbor disputes are almost never about the actual thing people are fighting over. It's not really about fences, noise, trees, parking spots, septic runoff, whatever. It's about respect. People can survive mistakes, accidents, misunderstandings, but disrespect sticks in your chest like a splinter. And that's what this whole mess turned into for me. Travis didn't just dump sewage into my pasture. He made a decision deep in his own mind that my land, my animals, and honestly my dignity mattered less than his convenience. That's why he shrugged when I confronted him. That's why he smirked when he said the ground would absorb naturally. Because in his world, consequences were things that happened downhill to other people. The lesson here is, arrogance makes people stupid. Especially the kind of arrogance wrapped in money, status, or the belief that you're untouchable. From a legal perspective, he probably thought he'd outsmarted the system with some cheap contractor shortcut. But shortcuts have a funny way of circling back around when they involve sewage and paper trails. And psychologically, this is something you see all the time with entitled personalities. They keep escalating until reality finally pushes back harder than expected. According to standard procedure, I probably should have waited quietly for the county inspection and let the system handle everything. Maybe that would have been the smarter path. Maybe not. Honestly, I still go back and forth on that some days. Because if I'm being completely truthful, pumping that sludge back uphill felt incredible in the moment. Not noble, not mature, just deeply, spiritually satisfying. But satisfaction and wisdom aren't always the same thing, and that's important too. I'm not sitting here telling anybody to copy what I did because situations like this can spiral fast, legally and personally. What I am saying is this. When people repeatedly ignore your boundaries, eventually somebody reaches a breaking point. And once respect disappears from a conflict, things usually get ugly for everybody involved. These days I try to keep my side of the fence clean, literally and figuratively. The sheep are healthy, the pasture recovered, and peace mostly returned to the hill. Though every now and then I still catch Travis looking away when our trucks pass each other on the road. Guess some smells linger longer than others. But now I'm curious, what would you have done? Would you have waited for the county, sued him, confronted him harder? Or would you have given him the exact same natural absorption treatment I did? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, I think half the internet's gonna call me a hero, and the other half's probably already drafting lawsuits in their heads.